Hi everybody and welcome to our Apprenticeship Service webinar today. We're going to be looking at how training providers can invite employers to create an Apprenticeship Service account and add you as a provider in that account. And this session is obviously for training providers. My name's Nick Duff from the Service Engagement team and I'll be looking after you today. But what I'd like to do is do my usual reminder, if I can, that this webinar is being recorded, and remind you that by registering and attending today, you've given your consent and that you're agreeing for the webinar to be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So if you feel that you've changed your mind regarding that consent, can I ask that you dial off? As far as recordings go, I'll tell you how you can access the recordings a little bit later on when we go through some more slides later. Hopefully you've all noticed that you've all automatically been placed on mute and you'll stay on mute for the session. The plan today is that the guys are going to do us a demo of what's changed in the service and what's been improved so that you can see how you can support employers to create an account and how employers can respond. And we'll also look at how you can track the invitations that you've sent to employers. Also how you can view the current employers that you're working with and the permissions you have, and then how you can request and amend permissions with those employers as well. And also we'll look at how employers can accept and decline any requests that you've got from you about your permission. And then as usual, after the demo, we'll go into a Q&A session. Once we're done with the Q&A, I'll let you know how we can access a handout from today's webinar, and that handout will have all of the key links that we'll be referring to during the session. If you've got questions for any of the presenters today, what I'd like you to do is to put them into the questions tab that you can find on your control panel. So the control panel should be on the right hand side of your screen, I hope. So you look for a heading called questions. If you click on that, you can type in any questions that you've got in there. And as usual, what we'll try and do is cover as many of those questions as we can within the time that we've got for questions and answers. And we'll certainly try and cover all of the main points that you raise in your questions, even if we don't get through to answering each individual question. We will share any question that you do submit with our dev team and our user research colleagues so that they can take account of your thoughts and insights as they continue to develop the service in this area and others as well. And as usual, again, we won't cover any questions that don't really relate to today's topic. So we're expecting we'll go for about an hour, I think, today, so about 60 minutes or so. And can I also remind you that as we leave at the end of the session, as we leave the webinar, just to let you know, we'll be directed to a short survey. I'd love for you to give us your feedback. We really want to know what you thought about today's webinar. So please just to take a couple of minutes to answer a couple of questions and give us your feedback. So for today's webinar, I've got quite a big gang with me today. So I've got Natalie Picton and Sudhakar Chinor, who will be doing the demo for us. And then I've got Dominic Howard, Olivia Waring and Sarah Swallow, who will be joining us to help answer any questions you've got in the Q&A session. And all of those guys work on the team that's been developing and simplifying this area of the apprenticeship service for you. So hi everybody, welcome to all of you, and I think we're ready to start. So Natalie, I'm going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks Nick, and hi everyone, I'm Natalie Picton, a product owner with the Apprenticeship Service. I've just got a couple of background slides explaining what we've done and why, and then we'll get on to the demo. So this project came about because we'd heard from training providers that they were spending a lot of time coaching employers through digital journeys, in particular the registration journey, adding a provider and setting permissions. And this is obviously a blocker to recruiting or getting an apprentice started. So what we've done is firstly, thanks Nick, improve the invitation to register journey. So we've moved some of the required fields, in particular the PAYE reference and accounts office reference, over to the training provider side. And what that means is that when the employer receives their invitation, they'll be able to register in a single step instead of the sort of 20 plus screens that they were having to go through before. We've introduced a new invitation to add a training provider and give permissions so that it's easier for you to connect with employers who are already on the service and request the permissions that you need. We've also introduced a new request to change permissions, so you can more easily request a change, for example, if you need to start recruiting. And we've also made some improvements to the training provider account, so it's easier to keep a track of the requests that are in flight, the outcomes, the employers you work with, and the permissions that you have. So we'll just need a moment to get set up for the demo, and then we can get that part started. Great. So we're going to start in the training provider account. The training provider name and everything that you'll see in the demo today is all dummy data. So on your home screen, you can see that there are two new tiles. Add an employer. This is where you can invite an employer to create an account or add you as a training provider. And then view employers and manage permissions. So this is where you'll be able to see the employers you work with, permissions that you have, and any requests that are in flight. We'll look at both today, but we're going to start with add an employer. So the first screen we see is this one, the start screen. This tells you what you're going to need when sending an invitation. If the employer already has an account, then you just need the email address of the person that you're inviting. If the employer doesn't have an Apprenticeship Service account, then you'll also need their PAYE and accounts office reference and the name of the person that you're inviting. There's an expectation that you've had a conversation with the employer beforehand and they're happy for you to use their information to help create their account. So if we click on the Start button, the first thing that we're asked for is the employer's email address. We'll use this to check whether the employer already has an Apprenticeship Service account. You should use the email address that the employer uses to sign in to GovUK1 login. If the employer doesn't yet have a GovUK1 login, then you can still invite them to create an account. Just make sure you use the same email address that they plan on using to create their One Login account. So if we put in the email address and click search, we can see that this employer doesn't have an Apprenticeship Service account. So if we had found an account, you'd be taken on a different flow, which we'll show you later in the demo. But we're going to start with how to send an invitation to an employer who doesn't yet have an Apprenticeship Service account. So this is where you'll need to enter the employer's PAYE reference and accounts office reference. We use this to check two things. Firstly, to double check that the employer doesn't already have an Apprenticeship Service account, and secondly, to verify the information with HMRC. And then when you click search, you'll receive confirmation that the details entered match HMRC's records, and there's definitely no Apprenticeship Service account already linked to these details. So all you need to do now is enter the name of the employer and then click continue. So this is where you can check through all the information that you've provided. If you made a typo when entering the employer's name, then you can change that here. And then you can see the permissions that you'll be requesting from the employer. So by default, these are set to yes and yes. But if you have a different arrangement with your employer, for example, you've agreed that you're going to add apprentice details but not recruit, then you can just change that here. You need to request at least one permission because this process wouldn't make a lot of sense otherwise. But if things change in the future, you can request a change to your permissions, and the employer can also change them at any time. So once you're happy with all of the information, you can just click send. And at this point, the request to create an Apprenticeship Service account will be sent to the employer. They'll have 14 days to respond. If they don't respond, but they still want to create an account, then you can just send the request again. You'll receive an email notification when the employer accepts, declines, or the invitation expires, and you'll also be able to keep track in your Apprenticeship Service account, which we'll show you a bit later on in the demo. So we're now going to show you sort of the same flow, but for an employer who already has an Apprenticeship Service account. So the start of the journey will be the same as before. You click on the Add an Employer tile, then click Start, and enter the employer's email address. So this time you'll see that an Apprenticeship Service account has been found, and you can click Continue to add the employer and request permissions. And this is where you select the permissions that you've agreed with your employer. And then you just click Confirm. And as before, the request will be sent to the employer and they'll have 14 days to respond. And again, you'll receive an email when the request is accepted, declined, or expires. So we're now going to have a look at how you'll be able to keep track of these requests in your Apprenticeship Service account. So from the home, you can click View Employers and Manage Permissions. This is where you can see all the employers that you work with or that you've invited and the permissions that you currently have. You can search by the employer's name or the agreement ID, and you can also see on the left-hand side there are some filters. So you can filter by the permissions that you have, or you can filter for requests that are in flight. This is a more comprehensive list of employers than the list you would have seen in the old organisations and agreements part of the account. So now if an employer names you on a vacancy or when adding an apprentice, they'll be automatically added to this list with permissions of no and no. You'll also receive an email notification to let you know that we can see this new relationship. And then you can request permissions if you want to. So if we search for an employer, and then we can show you an example of this. So in this example, the employer has named you when creating a vacancy, and you can see the date that they did that. And at the moment, the current permissions are no and no, so you don't have permission to add apprentices or recruit at the moment. But if you want to request permissions, if we scroll down, we can click the Request Permissions button. And then just like before, you can select the permissions that you need. And again, that request will be sent off to the employer and they'll have 14 days to respond. So if we go back to View Employers, and then we search for this same employer, you can see that there's now a request pending label. And when we go into the request, we can see the last action is now that a permissions request was sent and today's date. We can see the current permissions are no and no, and the permissions that have been requested. So if the employer accepts the request, then the current permissions will update to those that have been requested. If the employer declines or the request expires, then the permissions will just remain unchanged. So we'll go back and show you one more example. So this time we'll search for the employer that we sent the invitation to create an account to. So we can see that we sent them that request to create an Apprenticeship Service account and today's date. And again, we can see the current permissions are no and no because the account hasn't been created yet. And we can see the ones that we've requested. So if the employer accepts the request, then the current permissions will be updated to those that have been requested. If the employer declines or the request expires, then this employer would be removed from your list of employers because as far as the system's concerned, you aren't working together. But if that was a mistake, the employer still wants you to create an account for them, you can send a new invitation. So that covers everything on the training provider side. We've shown you the improvements to the training provider account and the 3 new types of request. So inviting an employer to create an account, inviting an employer to add you as a training provider and give permissions, and then finally requesting a change to your permissions. So now we're going to walk through the employer journeys for each of those 3 requests. So I'll just give Sudhakar a minute to find the first email, and we're going to start with the invitation that the employer will receive to create an account. Okay, so this is the email that the employer will see when they're invited to create an account. You can see that there are 2 steps. The employer will need to sign in to GovUK1 login or create a GovUK1 login if they don't have one already. And then the second step is to confirm their details and create the account. So when they click the link in the email, if the employer isn't signed in or they don't have a GovUK1 login, they'll be taken to the One Login site. But for today's demo, we're going to assume that the employer is already signed in. And so when we click the link, we'll go straight through to the registration page. And again, I'll just give Sudhakar a minute to set that up.
While Sudhakar's doing that, can I just remind people to pop their questions into the questions box if you have any for the panel later? Thank you.
Okay, so this is the registration page, and this single page replaces the current sort of 20-page registration process. There's 3 sections. So at the top, we've got the employer's details, so the user's name, the company name, and HMRC details. If there's a typo in the user's name, then that can be changed. At this stage, the company name, PAYE, and accounts office reference can't be changed, and that's because they've been verified with HMRC. So if there was an issue with that information, then the employer should decline the request and you'd need to send a new invitation with the correct details. So the second section is where the employer can see the name of the training provider and the permissions that have been requested. There's also a link with more information if, for example, they've forgotten what those permissions mean. And then the final section has a link to the employer agreement. So this is the same agreement that all employers sign when they create their Apprenticeship Service account, and we've just added a link at the top and bottom of the page to take them back to the previous screen. So if the employer is happy with everything, they just need to check the box to confirm that they've read the agreement and then click the button to create the account. So the account is now created and the employer can start using it right away. They'll receive a welcome email, and you, the training provider, will receive an email to say that they've accepted your request, and you'll also see the permissions updated in your account. It's worth noting that you'll only receive the emails that I've been referring to if you have your notification settings turned on. So if you want to receive those, you might want to check your settings. So the next journey we're going to show you is the request to add a provider and set permissions. So again, I'll just give Sudhakar a minute to find that email. Okay, and as before, there's a link to respond to the request. And again, if the employer is not signed in to GovUK1 login, they'll be directed to the One Login site. But for today, we're going to assume that the employer is signed in. And so when we click this link, we're taken straight through to the request. And again, this might take a minute or 2. Great. In real life, that would be sort of instant. It's just because we're setting things up in the background. So here we can see the name of the training provider and the permissions that are being requested. And then if we scroll down, if the employer is happy with what's being requested, they just need to select yes and then click the confirm button. So the employer is then taken through to the Manage Training Providers screen, and we can see the success banner at the top confirming that the training provider has been added to this list. At this point, an email would also be sent to the training provider to let them know that the request has been accepted. So we've got one final email to show you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this managed training provider screen in the employer account. Okay, so this is the final email to show you, and this is what employers will see if a provider requests a change to the permissions. Very similar to the one that you've just seen. And as before, if we clicked the link in the email, then it would work exactly the same as before. But we're not going to click the link today. Instead, we're going to show you what the request would look like in the employer's account. So I'll just give Sadako a moment to sign into that account so that we can show you what the employer would see there. Okay, so here we are in the employer account in the managed training providers section. You can see this is a list of providers that the employer works with or that have invited the employer to work with them. And the logic is exactly the same as in the training provider account. So if an employer names a provider on a vacancy or when adding an apprentice, that provider would be automatically added to this list. And as before, the permissions shown in the table are the current permissions. If a request is pending, then we see the same label that we saw in the training provider account. So we can see here the request to change permissions. And then if we click on view request, we can see a bit more information. So this is how we can respond to the request. If we had clicked the link in that email, we would have come straight through to this screen. But the employer can also get there from within their account, as we've just shown. So this is the request where a provider that they're already working with requests to change the permissions. Very similar to the previous journey. We can see the name of the provider and the permissions that have been requested. And just like before, if the employer is happy to accept these, they can just click yes and then confirm. And as before, we can see the banner at the top confirming the change, and an email would be sent to the training provider to notify them that the request has been accepted. And now if we scroll down, we can see that the request pending label has gone and the permissions in the table have been updated to yes and yes. And this time, instead of a link to view request, there's now a link to change permissions. So the employer can change their permissions at any time by clicking this link. And then they just select the new permissions that they want and click confirm. And the training provider would also be notified of any changes that the employer makes. So that's all of the changes on the employer side and the end of the demo. So we'll just navigate back to the home screen. So as you've seen, the employer journeys, particularly the registration journey, are much quicker and easier for the employer. So we hope that this will save you both a lot of time and energy. And we hope that the notifications and changes to the training provider account will make it much easier for you to keep track of things going forwards. So thank you for listening. I'll hand back to Nick for the questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Natalie. That was great. And like you said, I think it's really interesting just how much that journey's been improved from what was there beforehand. So yeah, thanks for going through that. That was really really good. Okay, just I've noticed in the questions there's a couple of questions asking when this is all going to be live from. My understanding is it's live. It's in the accounts now. Is that right? It's been deployed already. The change.
Yes, yeah, it's live now.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I'll pick up some of the questions that have been put forward then, and thanks everybody for submitting questions. There's quite a few for us to have a go at here. So Dom, I've got 3 or 4 questions for you if I can to start. So there's the first question we had was a comment from somebody who's used the functionality. Used it for the first time this week, and the employee gave them the PAYE reference number and account office reference number. The provider put it into the system and it said it couldn't find a match on HMRC. The employer is saying that that is their details, that's the details were correct. So what's going on with that? And in this case, the provider has asked the employer to contact the help desk. to take it forward. Is there any issues that we should be aware of or know about?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I noticed that one. There was a few other people as well with a similar question, and it sounds like what that employer has done is the right thing. Obviously, we check those details with HMRC, and they should bring back a match if they are correct. So obviously, on this call, it's very difficult to speak about a specific case, but if you would ask the employer to call the service desk and raise that as an issue, that will then come through to the development team with those details, and we can have a look to see why that hasn't been matched. If those details are correct, I can see that question, and there was a few other people with a similar problem. So this is something we weren't previously aware of. So if anyone else is having that issue, if either you or the employer could raise that, that would be a big help to us, and we can investigate why that's happening, because it should be matched in the system.
Cool. I mean, we can take those questions and provide feedback to the support desk that this is a thing, and obviously we'll share those, share the questions and share the comments with the dev team, so they can have a look at that. Yeah, so from an employer perspective, if they can, and I know it's a pain, but if they can contact the support desk, that'd be really, really good. And then from a provider perspective, if you can also raise it with the support desk, that means that again that the level of issue can be reported back through, and the dev team can have a look at that as well. So yeah, thanks for that. Still with you then, Dom, if I can. How do we? So the provider's asking, how do we set this up if the employer won't give us access to their PAYE and AOR number?
Yes, that's a difficult one, really. It would sort of depend on the relationship the provider has with the employer. If they weren't comfortable with giving you that information to create the account for them, they would have to go through the traditional method or the old method of creating that account, which would be through the task list in the employer account. So this is obviously for this new system is for employers who perhaps wanted some extra help, or wanted the providers to take the lead in this process, but there is still the option for them to go and create their own account in the old method. So that will be a choice between the provider and the employer and how they would prefer to do it, really. But that option is still there for the employer if they don't want to pass this information over to the provider.
Thank you. And then a question: so why are all the employers listed under the organisation agreements in the training provider account not visible in the View Employers and Manage Permissions section?
So the organising the agreement section that should have been replaced by the View Employers and Manage Permissions section. We transferred over all the old relationships in terms of the old provider and employer relationship structure. It may be that that a very old relationship could have dropped off if there's no permissions there. If that is spotted, then you can always re-invite the employer via this new route. If there was no permissions, that may be why it's not showing currently. But going forward, those ones with no permissions that are added in approvals or in recruit will now show. So there's a chance a very historic relationship may not show, but all the ones with permissions would be in there. So yeah, if anyone's noticing problems in terms of the fact that they think it's an active permissions-based relationship that is not there, then again, please raise that, because that should be there in the account for you to see.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And then still with you, Dom, what does it mean when the provider gets a notification that says, whoever it is, whichever employer it is, named you as a training provider in an apprenticeship vacancy? What does the provider take as their next steps?
Yes, this is a really good new piece of functionality that providers has asked for. So where an employer has stated that that provider will be working with them on this vacancy, we are now surfacing that for the provider to see, so that they don't have permissions to do anything on the behalf of that employer, but we now see that, and you can see that as a relationship. The next steps of that is again completely up to you and the employer. If that relationship is strictly just, yeah, you're working with them, but actually permissions within their account is not something that you want or need, then there'll be no action for you to do. It's just basically telling you that, okay, there's no permissions between you and the employer, but they have said that you're on this vacancy as the training provider. So just more information that previously wasn't surfaced for you. If then you think, okay, this is the start of a relationship, I think I would like permissions to be able to action things for the employer, then you can then send that request via the simple method of you've already got them in your list. I'll then like to request recruit or approvals permissions as a next step. But again, it will be completely up to you and how you want to handle that relationship with the employer.
Okay, cool. An interesting question here about the employer's email address, and is the search predicated on their personal name or the corporate email domain name? So I think the example is, so will a search reveal john@smiths.com if carlsmiths.com already has an account set up?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, I think the question was around could we see multiple accounts? The question is we know because we link to the account level. So exactly this example, if you invited John, and we see that the Carl already has an account, we can see that John and Carl are both linked to the same employer account. So we would let you know that account is already there. You could then still progress with adding that employer. It would just go to the account owners on that employer side. So you'd be taking down a slightly different path. So you wouldn't send a new invite to John. It would be to the owners in that account. So yeah, there's a check that goes in place there, and we don't create multiple accounts in that situation. We link it back to the employer account itself rather than an email.
Okay, cool. And then another one. Do we have, or so providers have the ability to delete any old requests if they're no longer needed?
Not currently, no. So currently the request set to expire after 14 days. That was a time period we felt was long enough for the employer to be able to respond, but also didn't leave us with, I guess, like the question would refer to lingering older requests that haven't been actioned. Obviously, it's the very early stages of this process. I think we had another question around expiry of requests and why it was the 14 days. And I think it's just generally that was what tested the best and what we thought was a reasonable time frame for those requests to expire. Again, this can be adjusted further down the line if we get feedback that it's too long or it's too short, and that's just the current way it's done. So yeah, with older ones, no, you can't delete them, but after those 14 days, they will just drop off of the system.
Yeah, there were quite a few comments about the 14 days and why 14 days. I think you've answered that already. So why 14 days? Why, did they get multiple reminders during that 14 days? What happens at the end of the 14 days? So I think you've sort of covered all of that. So thank you for that. So the next question we have then is, so a provider's an employer email and PAY account reference number, and they've been alerted that the account already was created by somebody else. So will this indicate to us or them who that person is?
Sorry, Nick, you were breaking up slightly there. I got most of that question. Could you repeat that, please?
I'll try again. So a question from a provider saying they were dealing with an employer and they've entered their email and the PAYE and the account office reference number, and they've been alerted to the fact that the account already exists but was created by somebody else. So the question is, will the system indicate to the provider or to the person, the employer, will it indicate to the provider who that person is?
So what will happen in that situation is obviously you've given an email address, and then we've realised that email unfortunately isn't linked, but there's an account already created with that page where an account office reference number. So we'll send an invite to the owner of that account. Now, like the question says, that may not be the person who you originally had inputted, but you will still be able to progress that ad journey and add that employer. And that employer who is the owner on that account, who has created that account, will receive an email telling them you've added them. We won't pass the email address details back to you on the provider end, but we will let you know that we've sent an email to that employer with your request and with the intent to add them in a new relationship. Then they'll action as they see fit based on that. obviously if the conversation had happened with that employer already, they could progress that on their end and accept it. So yes, they will get a notification, but we won't necessarily play back to the provider. This is the email address, because we can't give that information over to the provider at that stage.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then a couple of questions I think I pick up if that's okay. So there's a question about will handouts be provided with instructions about what's being covered today? So we don't do handouts necessarily from these with the demo, because obviously the demo was a live demo, but we are recording the session, so you will be able to access the recording of the webinar in a couple of different ways, through both the GoToWebinar platform and through our YouTube channel, and I'll give you the details in a slide at the end for those. And then there's also a comment asking whether we have handbooks or help guides for training providers, so they can send them to employers that help with the process of setting up accounts. So there's no handbook as such, but on the, and again we'll mention it on the slides later, the YouTube channel we've got does have some quite useful how-to videos to help people through key journeys in the apprenticeship service, and we've just updated and refreshed the how to create an account video, so that's in one of our playlists, that you could share that with an employer. And last year we also ran some webinars about the key journeys within the apprenticeship service, both from a training provider and from an employer perspective. So you can see all of the journeys that you, all of the key journeys anyway, that you'll need to go through when working with the apprenticeship service. So they'll be really good for both you and employers if you want to get more familiar with stuff around the apprenticeship service. And I'll give you the links later on. So the handout that we give you will be the handout with the key links from today, and you'll be able to access those recordings from those links in the handout a little bit later on. Okay, Dom, if I can come back to you, there's a question here about Gov1 login. So I'm assuming that the employer needs access to Gov1 login before they can actually create their account.
Yep, the short answer for this one is yes, and I guess to just elaborate slightly as well, it's really important that if you are inviting somebody to create an account for the first time, create a new account, and they've already, for whatever reason, created a Gov1 login account, that the email address they've used to create that Gov1 login account is the same email that they then use to give to you to invite them to create that account as well, because those two email addresses will match up together. So yeah, it's a good point to note that if that ever happens in that situation, if they've already got a Gov1 login account, that they give you that same email for the account creation as well.
Okay, cool. So employers have lots of different ways of setting up and structuring their accounts, but there's a question about what happens if the employer's got multiple organisations linked to and registered to their account. What's the procedure for getting the employer to add a training provider to those multiple organisations?
Yeah, unfortunately for that situation, that would have to be led by the employer. So the employer would have to add the provider via the usual method of doing that in the employer account, because they would have to select which organisation they intend to add that provider to. Unfortunately, we can't play back that information on the provider end for then the provider to select, because then that would tell the provider which organisations are linked with that employer. Sorry. So unfortunately, in that situation, it's one that would have to be employer led. So if that is happening, then ask the employer to go into their employer account and add you, and they can then select which organisation they want to add you to.
Okay, cool. Any plans for notifications to be advised to the training provider when employers approve funds for a learner?
Yes, I mean, I wasn't 100% sure whether what stage they meant, but in terms of the new functionality that I mentioned previously, when an employer adds a training provider in the approval system, when they're approving a cohort, that you will now receive an email to tell you an employer has done that if it's a new relationship. I think that was what the question was asking. Hopefully it was. So yes, you will get an email notification when an employer does that. So you'll be told that they've added you to a cohort.
Okay, we've got tons of questions to go through, so I think we'll try and rattle through these as quickly as we can. So there's a question. Providers to try to add an employer saying to enter a valid email domain. The employer saying it's the correct email address. Is there a way of getting around that?
Yep. So this is a known issue that we've actually surfaced this week. So I think maybe this person's already raised an issue with the service desk. Great if you have. We've actually got a fix in place already, and we're hoping to release that this week. It's just a bug with the email verification system that will be fixed very shortly. So hopefully that won't be a problem for much longer.
Okay, and then provided with three companies send invitations to using the new system. Each time the company can't be matched, we've escalated. Why might this be happening? Have we sort of covered that already?
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Sorry. I think any situation like this is a fairly common thing in the comments that I've seen. So yeah, if we could raise a service request on these ones, we can have a look into that and see why this is happening, because this is a new issue we've just realised on this call. So we'll look into that further offline, I think.
Cool. And then sort of another one is around so what happens if the central contact within a company leaves and their email is deactivated, leaving nobody with access to the employer account? How do we get around that?
Unfortunately, the only way for the employer to get around that one is the employer needs to call the service desk, and they'll have to go through some security questions and then get that account reinstated with somebody else in the employer's in the employer account. Yeah, there's no other way around that if that one person who was the account owner leaves, other than the employer having to contact the service desk and get that resolved with them.
Yeah, it is an important point, and we've always tried to encourage everybody. We've tried to encourage employers, but also to encourage providers to encourage employers as well to create multiple account owners on their account, just in that for that situation. But sometimes they don't want to, so it is an issue. But yeah, if you can always encourage your employers to have multiple people signed up as account owners on their account. Olivia, a question for you if I can. Um, is the provider able to send another request or another invitation?
Yes, sorry, I think you cut out, but were you asking if an employer doesn't complete the setup within the 14 days, can another
Yes.
request be sent? Yes, yes, it can be, yeah.
Okay. Sorry if I'm having audio issues, let me know, and I'll try and change headphones. So Olivia, if I can, another couple of questions for you. If there are four of us with access to a training provider apprenticeship service account, will only the person who set up the new employer get the notification when the employer sets up the account, or will everybody get it?
So everyone on the account will get the notification when the employer has set up the account.
Okay, cool. And then can the employer use this request? Can the employer use this to request a provider services as their training provider?
So on the employer's account, on the if they log in and they go to the Manage Training Providers page, they can add you as a training provider and request. They can set your permissions on there.
Okay, thank you. And Olivia, I think this was mentioned earlier on. Obviously, if the employer doesn't want to give the PAYE or Aon details, or if they wanted to do it themselves, they can still just set the account up themselves. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, cool. And then, so while I've got you again, Olivia, another question for you. Can employers change permissions themselves after already having accepted them? So if a provider submits a request for permissions to set provider permissions, the employer can always change them and amend them afterwards, yeah?
Yes. So if they accept the permissions, if they change their mind, if you have a conversation and you want to both have different permissions, then yeah, they can go into their account, into the Manage Training Providers page, and they can change your permissions from there.
Okay, excellent. Dom, a question for you if I can. So there's some positive feedback. A provider's been using the feature, thinks it's great, and has offered their thanks. But they have had an issue though with changing permissions using the new feature. It's reported to the help desk. It's been flagged up to the technical team. Has it been resolved? The permission they're trying to request is a new feature for us to be able to. Where is it? I've lost the question. Yeah, so a new feature for us to be able to recruit on their behalf. When they select the organisation, then go to send a request, the error message is displayed. There is a problem. These are your current permissions. Select new permissions. Basically, I only wanted to change one permission, not both. Is there an issue that we should be aware of there?
Yeah, you should be able to just change one. So, for example, if you've got recruit set to no currently, you want to change it to yes, and you want to keep approvals at yes, then just select yes to approvals to keep it like that, and then select recruit as the new one. The system should then see that you've changed one permission and allow you to progress. The only time you should be seeing that message is when you've opened up and selected the current permissions for both. You are allowed to just change one. Obviously, it's difficult without seeing the problems that you're having. And if you have raised that with the service desk and there's a technical problem, it will come to us. But as long as you are changing at least one permission, that should allow you to progress. So maybe the fact that you haven't selected at least one to change. But if that's not the case, then that will come through to us. But that's how it should work.
Okay. There's a few others. A couple of the questions. One, I'm not sure about this one, but I'll ask it anyway, Dom. Providers saying, why could employers add this particular organisation as a training providers without the training provider's permission? Is that possible? Can an employer add a training provider to their account?
So it's a very good question. It's more of I guess a structural question with how the accounts work and the way the apprenticeship service has been more traditionally, I guess, led by the employer. It's a very good question that I haven't really got the answer to be honest, Nick. But certainly one we could probably take away and try and understand the thinking behind that policy. It's more of an overall a policy with the apprenticeship service rather than something that we can probably address with this new service. But yeah, I do understand the question.
Cool.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, sorry, I think it's a sort of historic thing that employers would give providers permission to do things on their behalf, and so that was why it was sort of led by employers, and they would need to approve the giving of these permissions. And similarly, they had the facility to add training providers. But yeah, we can also just take that away and check that that's still what we want going forwards.
Cool. Thank you. And then another one, Sarah, if I can ask you, there's a question here. It says, do change of employer requests drop off after 14 days? As this particular provider's had a few which haven't been accepted, but haven't dropped off the account, and the account is now stuck. Is that right?
Hi, Nick. So if you send a request to add an employer who already has an account, or if you invite a new employer to the service and that request isn't accepted within that timeline, then the employer will drop off your kind of list of employers. But if you're requesting an update to permissions with an employer you already have that link with, you already have that relationship with, and that request isn't accepted, the employer will still stay on your list because you still have that pre-existing relationship with them. It's just that the request will no longer be active after that point.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then, Dom, one last question, if I can, is when setting the account up. So you're obviously typing an employer's, an individual's email details. Can, when you're setting up the account or helping the employer to set up the account, can you include multiple emails so that the employer can have 2 or 3 people receiving the notification?
No, unfortunately not. The way the current system works is when you're creating that account, you're giving us the email address of the person who will be the owner of that account on the employer end, so the person who will be, I guess, the controller of that employer account on the employer end. Once that's happened, it will then be up to that to that owner to decide on the employer end who they wanted to be on their account. We're not able to pass multiple email addresses through. It's a very simple process on the employer end to go in and add whoever they needed to in their organization when they get that account created. And that still has to be employer led because they're encouraged to manage that themselves within the employer.
Okay, cool. Right, thank you for that. I think I'm going to leave the questions there if I can. There's still a few more that I've not had a chance to look at, but I think time is sort of against us a little bit. So listen, thanks guys for answering all of those questions, and thank you to everybody that's listening that's put questions in. Yeah, really helpful, really insightful questions from everybody. So thanks for all of that. What I'd like to do is, yeah, okay, so I've moved on to the next slide. Excellent, thank you. So I've been talking about some of the videos that we've got available on YouTube, and so I'll take a minute just to remind you about the YouTube channel. It's now at DFE Sector Comms. So we've had a couple of changes to that channel over the course of the last year, but that's our new home. So if you've looked at the videos previously on different channels, then look at DFE Sector Comms. You can see on the screen that there's 3 playlists on that channel. They're the playlists that we look after. The recording of today's session will be in the Apprenticeship Service webinar recordings playlist, probably in the new year now, once we've made it accessible and published it onto YouTube. We also have all of our support videos covering the different functions of the Apprenticeship Service using the Apprenticeship Service playlist. And there's some videos also that have been created to support the delivery of apprenticeships that are available in the apprenticeship support video playlist as well. So you can subscribe to that channel. So if you click on the bell icon, you get alerts when any new content is uploaded onto those channels. Okay, and then if we move on to the next slide, please. Excellent, thank you. So on this slide, there's some links of places to go where you can access support. So we've put a PDF document together that you can now download in your control panel. So if you look at in your control panel under the handouts tab, there should be a document there for you, which has got all of the key links that we're going to talk about, or we've talked about from today. So places, things like there's a link to apprenticeships.gov.uk because there's lots of information on there about apprenticeships and the Apprenticeship Service. Just a reminder to you about the Further Education and Training Providers community, which I'm sure you all know is a peer-led discussion forum for providers where you get together to talk all things data and Apprenticeship Service related. And I've also got a couple of other links in there. So there's the link to the employer sign-in page for the Apprenticeship Service in case you've got employers who are struggling to find it. And there's also our knowledge article. I put a link in there about the knowledge article with links with information about the training provider permissions as well for you. To register for any of our future webinars, there's the link in there to the webinar platform, and hopefully by the end of this week you'll be able to get access to a recording of today's session from that link as well. So that recording will be available for about a month from the webinar platform, and that will help tide us over until we've got the final version published on YouTube just into the new year. And then obviously on that the handout as well, if you've got any other specific queries about the Apprenticeship Service, you can always use the self-service support tool or email the support team as well. And again, their details are on the slide. Okay, and then finally, if I can, I've been asked to just give a quick shout out about National Apprenticeship Week. Was it a couple of months or 3 months away now? So it's coming up really quickly. So it's taking place from November the 10th to Sunday the 16th of February. And the theme for NOR 25 is Skills for Life, and it's supporting our wider Skills for Life campaign. And obviously we'd really like all of our providers to get involved and to encourage employers to get involved as well. So if possible, what we'd like you to do is to sort of inspire employers and young people to own their role as talent developers through apprenticeships and skills. If you can showcase government skills programs and best practice from employers, that'd be great. And celebrate any of the successes you've got for individual learners and employers as well through the National Apprenticeship Week. So if you're interested in getting involved, and again, these are included on the handout, you can download and share our NOR toolkit. And we've got tailored toolkits for employers, for providers, and for apprentices and parents. And there's also a toolkit for T-Level Thursday, which is also a part of National Apprenticeship Week. You can download the NOR social assets, and you can have Teams backgrounds, social banners, social images, and graphics. And really importantly for me, if you can add any events that you're doing through National Apprenticeship Week onto the NOR event map as well, that gives a national reflection of all of the different events that are happening throughout the week as well. So really good to see all of your events on the event map. And then finally, you can keep up to date by signing up to the newsletter, or you can email people to find out more at the.week@education.gov.uk. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of our session today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of the questions, and to all the presenter team, thank you for your insights. Please remember as you leave to complete the short survey, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye. See ya.